Welcome to Olympian Water Testing, giving you the best in water analysis. Could copper contamination make students sick? We know that copper can be beneficial in small amounts, but as every heavy metal or as every nutrient, too much can make you sick. So are students safe? Well, let's find out. So this was on News Channel 5. They're asking the question, could too much copper in school drinking water be making your kids sick? And for almost 2 years, the schools have been testing for lead contamination, and lead is a much more dangerous heavy metal. But that being said, copper hasn't been something anyone's talked about. Usually when you think of heavy metals or you think of something hazardous in the water, you're thinking of lead primarily. Sometimes you're thinking about mercury or arsenic, but copper sometimes evades a lot of people when they're thinking of testing. But that changed actually when an insider came to News Channel 5 with a water sample from the fountain. So what happened? It settled some, and you can see crud there, maintenance worker Joey Combs said as he pulled up a bottle of water that turned green as he shook it. And Combs said he collected that sample from the East Nashville Middle Magnet School, from a third-floor water fountain. That's the color it came out as, he explained. If a student just come up from playing outside and decided, hey, I want a drink of water, and ran up to the fountain, that's what they're going to be in for a mouthful of. And that's pretty scary, because we don't always look at water when we drink it. So, if we're drinking water that is green, visibly green, that's going to have some negative health impacts for sure. Now, News Channel 5 sent the sample to an accredited lab for testing, and in addition to lead, it contained 6,500 parts per billion of copper. And the EPA says anything over 1,300 parts can make you sick. And even then, we get enough copper from our diet, so generally we do not need it in drinking water. We know that you can acutely get gastrointestinal symptoms, vomiting, diarrhea, and my tummy hurts type of thing, said Dr. Mary New, a Nashville pediatrician. She said she worries about school children who may have been exposed to high levels of copper. And keep in mind, this is just in a drinking water fountain. Imagine what's going on in other schools where they're not testing it. And that's the main issue, is that a lot of schools are not testing for it, or if they are testing, they're testing just for lead or mercury or another heavy metal, but they're forgetting about copper. Now, copper can cause a lot of issues. It can cause gastrointestinal problems, as they say, but it can also include things like liver and kidney damage from long-term effects, which is something we want to avoid for our students. We know that there are some data out there that suggests it may have been psychological effects in terms of attentiveness and irritability, as well as the fact that if you don't learn well, if you have a tummy ache, now do you? And you don't learn well also if you have liver or kidney damage in the long term. So they asked the doctor, is that something you look for? It's not something we routinely test for in any way. I mean, it's not typical on our radar. If the water like that on the third floor, trust me, the water is in the cafeteria like that. That's even more scary. It's not just isolated to one place. It's got to be on the second and the bottom floor. It's got to be on each floor. Now, most of the problems that we've experienced with lead and copper are typically from older buildings with copper piping, and they said copper piping, yes. In fact, the school does not test for copper, and they can test for lead, we can test for copper, can test for all of them. What's more important, though, is when we find these levels, we have to be diligent in taking steps that have been recommended. So while I do agree with that last sentiment, the problem is in a lot of schools, they're not testing for this, or they're testing for just lead or something else. But copper definitely is something to keep in mind, and it does affect older buildings a lot, but it can even affect newer buildings as well. So if there's a school around, it's always a good idea, or any institution,